This is Evie the Odd here with another scary story. Now, this one is more of a fairy tale, and some of you may be familiar with the Disney version of it, but tonight I'm going to tell you the true story. This is the story of Cinderella, as some of you may have heard Psycho Execution saying.
I kind of didn't even think I was talking that loud. I was muttering to myself.
Well, you never know. This camera's pretty good, and so is the mic.
Valid.
Anyway, as he said, it's the story of Cinderella. Once upon a time, in France, might I add. That's where the story comes from. It comes from France. Okay? Once upon a time, a long time ago, there was a noble man who had a noble wife who gave birth to a beautiful young girl. The wife, however, became quickly ill after birthing the child, and Cinderella only knew her mother for a very short period of time. But so great was the love between the child and the mother that when the mother died, Cinderella planted a tree branch over the grave, which grew into a beautiful laurel tree. Now, as was customary back then, the man sought another woman because, let's face it, back then you either had a whole bunch of kids or your line died off. The woman he married had 2 daughters of her own. They were hideous and wicked. Not just on the outside, no, ladies and gentlemen, they were hideous on the inside, and that's one of the worst things you can be. The stepmother loved her 2 ugly daughters, but paid little to no mind to poor, sweet Cinderella. She took her room, took her nice clothes, and turned her into a slave in her own household. Now you might be wondering, where the hell was the father in all this? Well, most parents back then, if you were a woman, you were in charge of the house. If you were a man, you just sort of went and did your own thing. You didn't really give a flying fuck. So, Cinderella was forced to be a slave in her own house. And every day she would go out to her mother's grave and cry. Her tears watered the tree. It gave it magic. So, a couple years pass, she grows up into being a beautiful young woman. And lo and behold, the prince of the country's like, hey, you know what, I'm a certain age now. I should probably find a wife. Though, quick note here. More than likely, this dude was probably 30 or more. And according to the story, she's only like 13, 14, maybe 16. Yeah, history is not pleasant. So, Cinderella, asks, can I go to the ball? Her stepmother says, if you finish all your chores, and you can find something suitable to wear. So, Cinderella finishes her chores and pulls out a gown of her mother's that she had kept safe and hidden. The stepsisters rip the dress apart. Now, I don't know about you guys, but messing with something that belonged to someone who's dead, who was close to someone else, that's just messed up. So Cinderella starts crying. She cries to her mother's grave and, tells her what happened. She asks the stepmother again. The stepmother takes linseeds. Now, I don't know if you guys know what they are, but they're really, really tiny, tiny seeds. And she scatters them into the ashes of the fireplace and says, if you can pick up all the seeds and put them back into their containers, then you can go to the ball. So Cinderella says, little birds from the trees, fly down, help me pick up all the linseeds. So the little birds fly into the windows and they help her clean it up. She shows her stepmother. Her stepmother says, you know what, no, even though you did what I told you to do, you're not going, because you don't have anything to wear. And they leave. So Cinderella goes out to the tree to cry and, be like, why is this happening to me? I don't do anything bad. But there, laying neatly folded on the ground under the tree, is a beautiful dress as silver as the moon, along with shoes and all the other good stuff that you need to go to the ball. So she gets dressed, hops on her horse, and goes there. She has a wonderful time dancing with the prince, but she returns early because she can't get caught being there. Her stepsisters and mother can't come back and her not be there. The prince begs her not to leave, but she escapes him and hides as he looks for her. She gets back, puts the dress up in the tree along with the shoes and the jewelry and all that, and goes and lays down in the ashes where she normally sleeps. Yeah, she didn't even have a bed. Disney painted a pretty lie. So the next day is the second day of the ball. And her stepmother and sisters are getting all ready to go and all that. And she asks, "Can I go to the ball today?" And her stepmother gives her another impossible task of picking grains of barley out of the ashes, along with linseed. So, yet again, Cinderella asks for help from the birds. They come and they pick them all up. And Cinderella shows it to her stepmother, and she's like, "Yeah, I was lying again." So Cinderella goes back out to cry. This time, she finds a dress and shoes and jewelry that are as golden as the sun. So she goes to the ball, has fun, dances, yada yada yada, and leaves early. The prince yet again begs her not to leave, but she has to. She gets home, takes care of it, and lays down, just before her step-siblings and her stepmother walk in. So then, she, third day of the ball, she's like, "Please, please, can I go?" And her stepmother's like, "No, only if you can pick barley, flax, and yet again linseed out of the ashes." So she sends her to do that. Cinderella calls on the birds again. Birds help her, and yet again the stepmother's like, "Nah, I'm lying. You're not going." So she goes back out to the tree to cry. This time she finds a dress more beautiful than every gem ever found on earth. It seems to be spun of gold itself. She goes to the ball and, has fun. But this time the prince is like, she's not getting away. So he has the servants put tar on the stairs. She runs to leave, but one of her shoes gets stuck in the tar. She can't pull it free, and she doesn't have time, so she slips the shoe off and runs home. Puts the dress and the shoe up in the tree and lays down. The prince picks up the shoe and's like, "Okay, I just gotta find the girl who fits this." So he travels far and wide throughout the entire kingdom. And eventually, he ends up at Cinderella's house, because, he can't just look for a girl who looks like the person that he was dancing with. No, he has to try it on every foot in the kingdom. So, he does that. And the stepsisters, okay, we need to get this. We need to marry the prince. And the stepmother takes the oldest and says, "Cut off your heels and cut off your toes. When you're rich, you will not need to walk anywhere." So, the stepsister takes a kitchen knife and cuts off her toes and her heels. In doing that, she manages to fit the shoe. So the prince puts her on his horse and, is like, "All right, here we go." But the birds, seeing this, fly near the carriage and say, "Red Roo, there's blood on this shoe. The toes are too long, the heel is too wide. This is not the proper bride." So he turns around, seeing the blood on her stockings and pouring out of her shoe, and's like, "Okay, this isn't the right girl." So the stepmother takes the second eldest stepsister and says the same thing. "Cut off your toes and cut off your heels. When you're rich, there will be no need for you to walk." So, yet again, listen to bad judgment, and she cuts off her heels and cuts off her toes. Yet again, the prince is fooled a second time. Gotta start thinking at this point, he's none too bright. And the birds, seeing this, they're like, "Really?" And they fly off again, saying, Red Roo, there's blood in the shoe. The heel is too wide, the toes are too long. The toes are too long, the heel is too wide. This is not the proper bride." And, yet again, he sees what they're talking about and takes her back. He's like, "Okay, seriously, are there any other girls in the house?" And Cinderella just happens to come out of the kitchen at this point. And he's like, "You, try on the shoe." She does, and lo and behold, it fits, and her rags turn into the dress from the ball. And of course, the other shoe appears on her foot. And so he takes her to the castle and they get married. At the wedding ceremony, the sisters have their eyes pecked out by the birds, and the stepmother is so jealous that she turns to stone. And then they all live happily ever after until about the ripe old age of 50, where they would die from sexually transmitted diseases, dysentery, and all the other wonderful things from the Middle Ages. Now, there are a couple things that I do have to point out. It's not always specified that it's a glass slipper. In fact, that's just something that came about recently. Grimm brothers said glass, but that's because the French word for glass and the French word for fur are very similar. So for all we know, it could have been a furry slipper. Maybe it's our bunny slippers or something. But there you have it. The real story of Cinderella. Think about that next time you're watching the Disney version. Night, kitties.